Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the final weekend of televised racing of this cyclocross season, the Brussels and Sint Niklaas and the final round of the X2O trophy in Brussels. With me here to discuss the racing fresh from a trip to Morocco is Issam. Thank you for being here again, Issam.
Yes, indeed. Fresh, landed safely, and back here in the Netherlands. Thank you for having me.
Any chance you were gathering some intel on Van Empel in Morocco, or not the case?
We crossed, I think she arrived already when I still didn't go to Morocco. So, unfortunately, no. But yeah, it was a nice time there. So enjoyed the weather a little bit better than here in the Netherlands. But overall, it was an okay trip.
Let's get into the racing then. Brussels was the final round of the X2O trophy and was the most important race of the weekend. Although there was really not all too much on the line anymore, as Iserbyt had 2 minutes on Lars van der Haar. Van der Haar, however, did have the fastest start, but Iserbyt was quickly to move into the wheel, and we went to a situation with 3 leaders as the European and Belgian champion Michael van Toerenhout was also at the front of the race. However, it was pretty clear that Iserbyt was simply the strongest. After he took it relatively easy the day before in Sint Niklaas, he placed a couple of attacks. Van der Haar did what he could to respond, but ultimately the barriers were an issue for him. He was running them whilst Iserbyt was jumping them. He lost time there every lap. And with Van Toerenhout using some team tactics from time to time as well, Iserbyt eventually opened a significant gap. When he was in the lead, however, in the section which looked a bit like an arena, maybe even a bit of a downhill pump track in there, he crashed. But that didn't even seem to affect him all too much. He still had a gap of 7 seconds and was able to extend that again. So he took the victory. Behind, Michael van Toerenhout dropped Lars van der Haar in the final stages of the race and ended second, with Van der Haar ending third. So Iserbyt with a win, Issam. I think it was pretty clear that at this point on the season, like so far in it, so much tiredness kicking in, it was impossible to be good 2 days this weekend. We saw Van Toerenhout and Iserbyt take it easy on Saturday and then doing better on Sunday, where the opposite went for Van der Haar and Sweeck, both riders who were very strong on Saturday but suffered more and struggled more on the Sunday. Iserbyt clearly the best and the freshest at this point of the season.
Yeah, indeed. I think it helped the way they were riding on the Saturday, and then when they went to Brussels, they clearly had their eyes on the X2O trophy, at least to finish it in fashion, in a very strong way. I think Iserbyt summarized it quite well in the post-race interview that he had a very good day, he felt it, and on a course like this in Brussels, it's in a way, I wouldn't say relatively easy, but when you have a gap and you just don't make the mistakes, you can really put the others behind you under pressure, and it's quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it is doable to keep a gap. And I think Iserbyt played that well, was in a very good form, and as you said, it's at this time of the season, at the end of it, it's so difficult to do the same thing that you were able to do at the beginning of the season, where you were able to perform quite well in both races of the weekend. And even then, some riders struggle a little bit with such an effort, but now it's obviously with it's also motivation, and some when they had a very good performance on the Saturday, they entered in the race in Brussels, and then already it's very difficult to really motivate yourself and get the most out of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's something we said last week as well. It's a very weird phase of the season. You don't know who has what intentions, because if you look at a rider like Sweeck, he took the win in an interesting race in Sint Niklaas, but he already said in the post-race interview, my weekend is already a success, and for now I'm just going to see what tomorrow brings. But he already indicated that he wasn't too bothered about that race, and he never got into that race, ended 15th. I think he just came to collect his start money and the remaining prize money for the series, but he clearly wasn't bothered, else he wouldn't be ending 15th. He was never at the front of that race, and if you would try and have bad legs, you would fade back a bit, and that didn't happen. Whilst at the front of the race, you could see that Van der Haar did have the motivation. He kept trying, but the barriers were his fatal flaw on the course, because that's where the misery started for him every lap. And then the other misery was Van Toerenhout pulling team tactics, and more misery was the section which, as said earlier, looked like an arena, a bit of the downhill pump track, although it's not meant to be a pump track. I don't think it qualifies as one, but the bumpy downhill and uphill around the campus where students normally sit to eat their lunch. The final corner there where Iserbyt crashed in the race, that was normally a strong point for Iserbyt, where Van der Haar suffered. So despite being stronger on some other sections and really going for it, ultimately Iserbyt was just the best, and once Van der Haar overworked, Van Toerenhout needed to finish him off, and that's what Van Toerenhout did in the final part of the race. But yeah, I don't think Van der Haar is too bothered about that either. Like, again, what's on the line for him? He secured a second place in the classification, he went for it, and in the end, it is what it is for him. He's third, Van Toerenhout second. Wasn't really all too interesting, and I think all riders on the podium will be satisfied, because again, that's just the phase of the season you are in. It's not a matter of, oh, I need to get wins or secure classifications. It's just, I get a good result, I'm happy. I get a bad result, I'm not too bothered about it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the it's the irritation is building up a little bit. I think some of the riders are very happy to not see each other again, but again, at this phase, it's very difficult to ask from your body the same that you were able to demand from your body mid-season or at the start of it. And you only really realize how these riders think when you actually are in that same situation. Every weekend you have the racing, and every week you have to, week in, week out, you have to focus and make sure that you're preparing yourself. And yeah, then you come into the last couple of races. In a way, everything is a bit played. Like you said, for Van der Haar, there was still a little bit at stake, but even that was, it was going to be difficult. And yeah, then, for him, I think he can look on a very solid season with some struggles in between, but overall it was quite good. And his racing also this weekend was also very good. In both races he performed well. He was able to really give on a fight. I would have loved to see him win one of these races, but I think overall he had a very solid effort this weekend.
Yeah, there were definitely some riders that could take positives from this racing in Brussels. If we look at the entire top 10, Iserbyt ahead of Van Toerenhout, Van der Haar, Adams, Nieuwenhuis, Kuhn, Kamp, Van der Bos, Van der Putten and Looks. I think in particular Adams, Nieuwenhuis and Kuhn will be satisfied with the racing in Brussels. Adams, we know, had some issues about his sponsors, but luckily, because we record on Monday for once and not on the Sunday, we now know that Jens Adams has found a new team. He's going to be joining Athletes for Hope. This is the very old team of Shirin van Anrooy. You might remember she was racing in a jersey with the yellow Chocomilk logo on it. That has rebranded to Athletes for Life. It supports children with disabilities, tries to generate funds for medical examinations and research towards those things. So a very noble initiative, and he will be joining them. They have a BMX and triathlon team as well, and he will be representing them in cyclocross. Nieuwenhuis also with a pretty strong showing, and then Kuhn also with a good showing. But I think for Kuhn, it could have been even better this weekend, because this allows me to make the bridge to the racing in Sint Niklaas on Saturday. It was Kevin Kuhn's birthday there, and he was riding an extremely good race in the first part of the race. He was up there in the front group of 5 riders, but unfortunately he had a puncture which caused him to ride almost half of a lap on the flat tire, lost a lot of time, managed to come back, but ultimately paid the toll for the efforts of that. But that was a real shame, because he was looking very good to at least secure a top 4 and maybe even a podium, because Iserbyt wasn't all too bothered in that final lap. He let Sweeck and Van der Haar go. Kuhn maybe a bit too active to actually challenge for that podium, but nevertheless, he was super strong there in Sint Niklaas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he wanted to give himself a present with a podium. He looked definitely very good, and that's the thing as well. With the end of the season, it's for some riders it can actually, be something where they think that they have a chance, or they sense that they have something to play for. You have nothing to lose, obviously, and Kung obviously with the birthday probably wanted to try something, and it looked very good up until that puncture, and then it became a little bit more difficult. But like you said, I think that he definitely had a shot for the top 4 and maybe even for the podium, and that would have been very, very good for him, despite the fact that it is at the end of the season, and despite the fact that it's an exact cross. It's still a televised race, and I think that it's still a relatively important race. So for these riders, that can make the difference, and I think overall he can look on a strong season where he lost his Swiss championship, but nevertheless, it's from his point definitely a very strong season, probably with most notably Val di Sole.
It was an entertaining race, and sure, as you say, it might have just been an exact cross. Like, there's positives to take for a rider like Kuhn, but I actually enjoyed watching that men's race, and it is much needed because it's way more entertaining than a race like Brussels at this point of the season. I really like the tactical aspects that this race has had to bring to us. We'll talk about the women's race soon, but that was also super interesting there. Maybe not in terms of close combat or atmosphere or just the feeling of the race, but tactically, with riders having certain sections where they were better, it definitely made for an interesting race. And the same goes for Lars van der Haar. If we look at his race, part of what made it interesting was that Van der Haar had a bad start. He only came to the front of the race in Sint Niklaas after 30 minutes. And once he came there, he started putting the pressure on a little bit. But Iserbyt, Sweeck, they were both hiding a bit. Van der Haar took quite some initiative, but also took enough time for a recovery, because at some point it looked plausible that Wiesure and Van der Bos would be coming back to the leading group. They eventually didn't, but it definitely made for an interesting race, and Sweeck eventually took the win. I think it was pretty inevitable that he would take it. And then I come to the question, did Lars van der Haar use the right tactics in the final lap? He paced for almost the entire lap. I can somewhat understand why he does it, because the beginning of the lap had this steep climb, which really was the bottleneck on the course. If you weren't first there, you were maybe lucky if you could make it up in second, but if you weren't in the first two, you would need to hop off your bike or pedal a little bit with one foot clipped out. And that cost time. That was a key feature every single lap. But in the final lap, Van der Haar wanted to be first there, but then paced the entire lap. And you could just see it coming, with Sweeck sitting in the wheel seemingly effortless, that he would take the lead before the final sand pit towards the finish. And that's what he did. He opened the gap to the sand, because he is the sandman, and then sprinted to victory. But do you think that was the right decision by Van der Haar, or do you think he should have gambled on a sprint?
I think for Van der Haar it wasn't a bad tactic. I think that I can definitely understand why he tried to put Sweeck under pressure. Maybe Van der Haar was a little bit irritated by the way Van Toerenhout and Iserbyt were riding, but overall I think that his decision there was not a bad one. But Sweeck definitely knew what he was doing, knew the crucial moment to be ahead, and then in the sand section for him it was basically I would say decisive, puts Van der Haar under pressure, and then it's case closed for Van der Haar, and then you have to settle for second. But I think that this Sweeck, even if he would have gambled on a sprint, it would have still been a bit difficult for Van der Haar to then beat this Sweeck. And I think that looking at the race afterwards, it would have been maybe, you can always say, if he didn't really put too much pressure on in the last lap and saved a little bit for a sprint and saved for that really penultimate part of it, then it would have been something else. But I think that overall Van der Haar couldn't have done a lot different.
I think in a normal race he might have had a bit more of a chance in a sprint than here. If he waits here, it's still inevitable that the same scenario plays out. Sweeck is going to try and be first through the sand and open a gap there, and I think it was kind of inevitable that Sweeck was going to win this. I mean, his entire weekend was focused around this race. He didn't care about Brussels. I don't really know why, but maybe he just doesn't like the course. But he clearly was here for Sint Niklaas, and he went all out for that. He got it, whilst for Van der Haar, Brussels was still important, as shown by his dedication in that race, which should have gotten him a second place. I think he was stronger than Van Toerenhout, but also second here. It's unfortunate for him. It's kind of the story of his season. A lot of second and third places, but still a decent showing. I think Sweeck also deserved the win and continuing a strong season with quite some wins. So, do you know how close is he to the 10, which he said at the beginning of the season at the team presentation? I think he is not going to make that, right? I think he's going to end at like 7 or 8, but still good numbers for him.
Yeah, he's probably going to come a little short, but let's be honest, I think when he was saying the number 10, it was for me, I wouldn't say a big laugh, but at that moment, it was definitely something that I think was not going to be achievable. And, he came a little short, but I think that this season for Sweeck definitely has been a turnaround in terms of his career, and he made that step. He got a lot out of it and matured in his role as a rider. And I think that this season he proved himself to be a very valid leader of a team, someone that can take the points when Van Aert and Van der Poel are not there. And somebody that can win races. And I think that we knew that he could do that, but we were just not really seeing it at the higher level and when it really was necessary and for classifications. And now it came a little bit out, and it's pleasant thing to see, obviously. And despite the fact that he's not going to make those 10 victories overall, I think that he definitely the victories that he got and the way he got it as well, I think that he can look back on the season, which was, definitely above my expectations and probably maybe even above his.
In the rest of the top 10, there were still some interesting names. Let's go through the top 10. Sweeck with the win ahead of Van der Haar, Iserbyt, Van Toerenhout, Wieseuren, Van der Bos, Kuhn, Van Kessel, Van der Putten and Ronhaar. Very good race by Joran Wieseuren. He had a rough season as world champion under 23. He got, going pretty well in the final part of the season. Also won the X2O trophy under 23 and the final round of the X2O trophy for the under 23 riders in Brussels. Was pretty good at Cyclocross Worlds, just missed out on the medal there, so improvement on his side. We already went over Kevin Kuhn, unlucky to have that puncture. And I will end the men's side by mentioning Pim Ronhaar. He had a pretty good race, although that 10th place doesn't really reflect that. He was dead last basically after a crash very early on in the race, but managed to recover pretty nicely and then ended 10th. But he did pay the price for that crash and big effort put in on the Sunday, as he lost his 4th place in the X2O trophy to Jens Adams as he finished 16th in Brussels. Then the women's races. There's only one thing which we can start about, and it's not a summary. We need to talk about the lights, because there were 2 races this weekend, and in both races the start lights didn't work for the women. In Sint Niklaas they didn't work. The commissaris came on as the music was already playing the start tune. He walked on and told the athletes, we're going to be starting on the whistle. Went back, he blew and they went. In Brussels the lights didn't go out either. But this time the commissaris did not walk onto the track and inform the riders, he just blew the whistle. Half of the grid went, the other half of the grid stood stalled. Alvarado shot into action a bit later as she followed the rest, was making some gestures with her hands, what is going on. But ultimately the race was not restarted, they were sent away. And from there on, Alvarado was in a bad position, needed to move up, cost a lot of energy, then was probably frustrated and mentally couldn't put herself over it and gave up on a chase for the second place in the X2O trophy, was super upset about it after the race. Her dad gave an interview during the race with the Belgian broadcasters saying that he was not happy. They went to complain at the jury. The jury didn't really seem to care according to Alvarado, and that was that. What a mess, Issam. I mean, how can this happen at what is one of the highest levels of cyclocross racing? I mean, it should just not be able to happen. Saturday is the example of what should happen. Sunday is the prime example what happens if you just take measures into your own hands.
The unprofessional side of the sport, I would say, because normally there are procedures for this, and I think that on the Saturday it was handled okay. It's obviously not something that you want to have for the riders because it takes some. It's very difficult then after such an issue to pump yourself up and get back going again. But what happened in Brussels was obviously not the way it should be done, and it's for a race that is of that importance. It's part of one of the bigger classifications that we have in cyclocross. To then have such a procedure and such an event going on and such a mistake being made, I think it's, in my opinion, a bit unacceptable. And Alvarado was one of the main women that got affected by that incident, was quite upset by it, and I think that was, truthfully, that is fully understandable because, her race was definitely ruined by it, and normally the commissaire should have been straightforward, and when he realized that mistake was made, should have just called off the start and do it over again, because there was a lot of visual confusion by some of the riders, and some of the riders obviously just went, but that is definitely not the way it should be done. And I think it's a bit weird, especially the reaction afterwards from the commissaire as well.
It reminded me of two things, and they are related with each other. Earlier this year, I was in Tabor, and the men's junior race there had a false start. David Thompson, who became Pan American champion junior men later, was on the front row. He was fixated on the lights, just like Alvarado. The lights didn't go. The commissars did the same there. He blew the whistle. Thompson stood still whilst the others around him moved. But because he stayed still, they eventually restarted the race. And that reminded me of a situation with Albert many years ago. I don't exactly remember where it was. But there, Albert moved after what was a false start. But because he moved, they didn't restart the race. Afterwards, they said, Albert, if you would have stayed in your position here, we would have restarted the race. But because he moved, he was somewhere in the back of the field, and it didn't matter too much because he still won. But the point is there, like if Alvarado would have stayed in her position there, they would have probably restarted the race. Was now they didn't, and it's just a mess, and this should not be allowed to happen. Like, there should be a protocol for this. If the lights don't work, the commissars comes out, tells the people that they are starting on the whistle, and then they go. Because in this, I'm thinking about a rider like Francesca Baroni. We know that she has trouble with hearing. She is almost completely deaf. For her, the start lights are a great starting option because she knows that when they go green, she can go. But not only does she not know that the lights aren't going to be the start signal, they're using something that she's unable to use or hear. I mean, like, she doesn't hear the whistle. And when they do start on a whistle, the team has people who have a flag. And now I assume that wasn't in place. So that's another reason that it's just completely unacceptable the way this happened. I mean, ultimately for Alvarado, I think for result it didn't matter too much. Sure, it will have been a big mental blockade during the race, but I don't think the legs were there to challenge Brandt, because Brandt looked fairly strong, keeping up with Van Empel for a while, ultimately needing to let Van Empel go. And that brings us to the final conclusion. One woman show by Van Empel, decent race by Brandt, but Van Empel said 2 weeks of no training and now I win the race. I mean, is just telling for the level she has. It's pretty insane, although we do have to say Brandt has not been training all too much because her focus is also on the road season, just like for Van Empel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we needed any confirmation of Van Empel being the best the women's category or in the women's category, I think that it was shown only in these last 2 weeks already. I mean, not really being on your bike, and I think this week, or at least last week then for us, because we were recording on a Monday, that it's for her, obviously. I think she was training a little bit, but still to be able to perform the way she did, it shows the level difference. And like you said, I think for Brandt this season, we have talked about it quite a few times. It hasn't been a perfect season for her, and for both women, it's now looking into the road season. And for Van Empel, not only the road, but also the mountain bike campaign that is going to be interesting for her. And the goal maybe of trying, at least, if it's any possibility of trying to qualify for 2024, which is definitely going to be difficult with the squad the Netherlands have on the women's side.
Yeah, I don't see that happen. I just don't see a way forward. Realistically, Buck Pieterse has been the better mountain bikester out of the two. And even for Pieterse, it's going to be a struggle to qualify, because with Anne Terpstra, they had one of the best mountain bike racers of last season. She was leading the World Cup for quite a while. I'm not exactly sure if she won it in the end or just missed out, but they have a very strong rider with her. And with Anne Tauber, they have another rider who regularly is finishing in or around the back end of the top 10. That's a big ask. I do think Buck Pieterse has what it takes to battle with Tauber. Maybe not yet with Terpstra, because if we look at other riders who made the step, Monica Mittenwaller or Caroline Bohe, they managed to do pretty well last season, getting a number of top 10s. For Mittenwaller, of course, the big issue was the start. But it's going to be difficult for Van Empel, because not only does she need to make a step to become better than Pieterse, which she only has been once last season, which was at a unimportant race very early in the season. She also still needs to be regularly beating Terpstra or Tauber, and I don't necessarily see that happen, but who knows. She surprised many people in the cross season. Maybe she will surprise me in the mountain bike season, but I'm looking more towards the road, because she's doing La Flèche Wallonne, La Flèche Brabançonne, Volta Limburg Classic. I do not rule out that they add Amstel Gold Race to that schedule. And if then the first mountain bike races don't go as great as expected, I also don't rule out that they take her to some other races like Tour de France Femmes or whatever. But exciting times up ahead. I'm, as you can tell, quite excited for what Van Empel and Pieterse are going to be doing during the cross off season. Let's still look at the entire top 10. Van Empel took the win ahead of Brandt. Decent race by Brandt, as said, managed to keep up with Van Empel for 2 laps. Worst, also decent race, ending 3rd. Alvarado in 4th after that start drama. Betsema 5th despite a rough crash. Luckily she didn't seem too injured. Ribeirol in 6th ahead of Van Alphen. Baroni despite some issues at the start, ending 8th. Verdonschot in 9th and Manon Bakker in 10th. If we look at the racing in Sint Niklaas the day before, I really enjoyed that race, as I mentioned earlier. There was a nice dynamic with riders going from the front and then coming back, a nice battle every lap for the first position ahead of the steep climb. Then you had riders that were winning time on places, losing time elsewhere. Brandt was losing a lot of time before this one concrete barrier which was on the course, as she wasn't able to jump, whilst Worst and the others were able to jump that. Then you had the jumpers on the barriers, with Van Alphen coming back into the race together with Manon Bakker, as both were jumping the barriers. Betsema coming back into it after being out of it. I thought it was a really fun race with shifting dynamics, and the shame it didn't go to the final lap, as Worst attacked in the penultimate lap and took the win, but it was a fun race. And for Worst it seems a bit of a reoccurring theme now the past seasons that she does really well in the races post-Worlds, and that creates a bit of optimism towards next season. And I mean, we can just hope that they solve the issue with her knee and that she is able to have a season next year which is similar to what Alvarado had now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that these races also show that the potential is definitely there, and you just hope that she can fix the issue that she has with the knee, if it needs surgery or something else, some other treatment. It just needs to be fixed, and then you can go into a season where there are not a lot of unknowns. You basically know where you're at. You need to improve your level, obviously, and then see where it goes. But it's just a bit difficult when you have issues with the knee or issues with the back or anything related in terms of health that hampers your performance. It's never great, and I think also mentally it could be quite difficult to deal with, and that can for a part also explain some of the irregular results. And yeah, I think it's for her, these last couple of races have been very encouraging, and yeah, for now it's hoping that the issue can be fixed and quite easily without any big days off, and then from there it's a question if it's then possible to get back to the level as quickly as possible.
I think overall for the rest of the riders in the top 10, we've really told their stories the past couple of weeks, and not really anything that stood out to me, at least. Worst to Alvarado, Brandt, Betsema, Bakker, Van Alphen, Verdonschot, Kay, Baroni and Bentveld in the top 10. I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's good to see Baroni in there, but she's been doing that for a while now, post-Worlds. Verdonschot, same goes for her, decent showing. I will mention Anna Kay, nice to see her in the top 10 again. For her it must be difficult as well, because it's already quite some seasons ago that she was just 18 or 19 years old, racing in this Experza kit, coming at the front of the races in some of these Brico crosses back then early in the season, and then being hyped as a big talent. But seemingly a couple of tough seasons. We of course know about the injuries, sustained one in Baal this year, broke her collarbone last year. It's not been easy for her, so I think it's good that she gets top 10, but I also realistically think that she's been surpassed by more talented riders. But who knows, maybe if she has a proper season next year, she will be doing a bit better again. Issam, thank you for discussing the final weekend of racing with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The season is almost over. Still 1 week of racing, and then it's bye-bye in terms of cyclocross for 2022-2023.
Yeah, it's almost a wrap. We have some podcasts coming up still, though. On Thursday, we are releasing a podcast with Sven Nys. Yes, the team manager of Baloise Trek Lions has had time to sit down with us to talk about the season of the Baloise Trek Lions. We talk about Joris Nieuwenhuis, but also about Shirin van Anrooy and the current state of cyclocross. Then next week on Monday, a brand new podcast for you. We will be wrapping up the season with a talk about the Sluitingsprijs in Oostmalle, which is only visible on regional TV or on site. And in that same podcast, our main priority will be to talk about the World Cup calendar, which is being released this Friday. Thanks everyone for listening. That's the schedule for the upcoming week. After that, we head to the road and mountain bike season, with our first podcast about that being Strade Bianche. Thanks everyone for listening, and goodbye.